Voices from the locked room. It started with a phone call, one that no one ever expected to get. A neighbor reported hearing strange noises from the apartment down the hall. Not the usual loud music or a couple arguing. These were muffled voices, whispers, cries for help, coming from a room that had been locked for years. By the time the landlord opened the door, what they found inside would leave everyone speechless. This isn't a horror movie. It's not urban legend. This is a true story. A story that unfolded in a quiet neighborhood where everything seemed perfectly normal until it wasn't. Behind those four walls was a secret, hidden in plain sight. The kind you only hear about on the news or in late-night podcasts. But this time, it happened just a few blocks away. Inside that locked room, time had almost stood still. The furniture, the smell, the cold air, it all told a story that no one was ready to hear. There were signs that someone, or maybe more than one person, had been living there. But how? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone noticed until now? At the center of it all was a young woman named Sara. Quiet, always kept to herself. Most neighbors barely knew her name, but she knew every sound in that building. She had heard those voices for months. Everyone told her she was imagining things until now. As the investigation began, layers of truth started peeling away. The past collided with the present. And what seemed like a simple case of a forgotten room turned into something far more chilling. Who were the voices coming from the locked room? And why were they silenced for so long? Stay with us, because what comes next will leave you questioning what you thought you knew about the people living right next door. Sara had always been the type to notice things other people missed. Maybe it was because she spent most of her time alone, or maybe it was because she paid attention to the little details, like the flicker of a hallway light, or how the air near apartment 3B always felt heavier, colder. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about that door that never sat right with her. It had been shut for as long as she could remember. No one ever went in. No one ever came out. At first, the sounds were faint, barely there. A soft thud. The scratch of something against wood. Then the voices started. Not every night, but enough to keep her up. They weren't loud, more like whispers, frantic, desperate, almost like someone was talking through a wall. She mentioned it to the building manager once. He brushed it off, said it was probably the pipes or an echo. After that, she stopped bringing it up. But she started keeping notes. Dates, times, the exact sound she heard. Maybe she couldn't prove what was happening, but she knew it wasn't nothing. The building itself was old, with walls that held onto secrets. Most of the tenants were either too busy or too distant to care. The woman on the third floor rarely came out of her unit. The man downstairs worked nights and was barely around. Nobody really knew anybody. That's what made it easy to hide something or someone. When the police finally opened the door to apartment 3B, the hallway filled with silence. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. Whatever was inside had been kept hidden for a long time. The officers didn't say much at first, just exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. Sara watched from the stairwell, her heart pounding. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't turn away. Part of her needed to know that she hadn't imagined everything, that the voices were real. But even she wasn't prepared for what they found inside. There were no immediate answers. Just more questions. An old mattress on the floor. Scratches on the walls. Personal belongings that looked untouched for years. And one small notebook sitting by the window, half open, with a name written on the cover. A name that no one in the building recognized. That was the moment Sara realized the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The notebook was old, its pages yellowed at the edges and filled with small, shaky handwriting. It belonged to someone named Lena. No last name. No date. Just that name on the front, scribbled like it was done in a hurry. Inside, the pages were filled with scattered thoughts. Some entries were full paragraphs, others just words repeated over and over.
Help me.
He watches. Can anyone hear me? Sara couldn't stop thinking about it. She tried to push the images out of her head. The locked room, the cold air, the look on the officers' faces, but they stayed with her. She started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, just flashes. A girl sitting alone, her back to a wall, whispering to herself in the dark. She wasn't sure if her mind was filling in the blanks or if she was remembering something that didn't belong to her. Meanwhile, the police stayed quiet. No updates. No press. Just a generic statement about investigating a possible case of unlawful confinement. But Sara knew there was more. She started asking around. Most of the neighbors claimed they never noticed anything. But one older man, Mr. Kwan from the second floor, said he remembered a girl named Lena living in that unit years ago, before the current landlord bought the building. She was quiet, maybe in her teens, always looked a little scared. Then one day, she was just gone. Sara's thoughts kept circling back to the notebook. She showed a few pages to her friend Jamal, who worked at the local library and had a thing for old journals and handwriting analysis. He noticed something strange. The entries weren't all written by the same person. The style, the pressure on the pen, it changed. At least 3 different people had written inside. That changed everything. What if Lena wasn't alone in that room? Sara started going through city records, trying to trace who lived in 3B over the years. But the paperwork was a mess, missing documents, name changes, unexplained gaps. It was like someone had tried to erase a part of the building's history. And the deeper she looked, the more the voices came back. Not just at night. Even during the day. Faint, distant, but real. Someone or something was still trying to be heard. And Sara wasn't sure if she was uncovering the truth or becoming part of it. Sara barely slept anymore. The notebook never left her side. She read it like it was a map, trying to piece together who Lena was, who the other voices belonged to, and how they were all connected to that one room. Her apartment, just 1 floor above 3B, had started to feel different too. Colder, like something unseen had settled into the walls. Every creak in the floor, or whisper through the vents, made her heart race. She knew people would call her paranoid, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her now. Jamal found something. He had traced a name from the notebook, one of the ones that didn't belong to Lena. A girl named Emily Carter. She'd been reported missing nearly 7 years ago. Last seen near the same neighborhood. Her case had gone cold. No leads. No suspects. Nothing. And somehow, her name had ended up in a notebook found in a locked apartment no one had lived in for years. Sara brought this to the police, hoping it would push the investigation forward, but they gave her the same distant answers. "We're looking into it," they said. But she could tell they weren't seeing the full picture. So she kept digging. Old newspapers, archived rental documents, building permits. Anything that could explain how different women might have ended up in the same apartment, years apart, and simply vanished. That's when she found something buried in a zoning record. 3B wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. It had been marked for demolition after a fire 2 decades ago. A fire that supposedly gutted the inside of the unit and left it structurally unsafe. But the room clearly still existed. Someone had restored it. Quietly. Without permits. No paper trail. That night, Sara returned to the building's basement, where old maintenance logs were stored. As she flipped through boxes of faded papers and handwritten notes, she found a name that had come up before. Thomas Grady. He'd been the building's previous owner. Retired early. Moved away after selling the place. But in one logbook, his name appeared over and over, linked to work orders that never officially happened. Repairs on locks. Soundproofing materials. Extra insulation installed in 3B, even after it was supposed to be condemned. Something wasn't right. Back in her apartment, Sara sat at the edge of her bed, the notebook open in her lap. She could feel it, the tension in the air, the weight pressing against her chest. Then a soft knock. Not at her door, but on the floorboards beneath her feet. 3 slow, steady knocks. Directly above apartment 3B. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Her eyes locked on the floor. The knocking came again. Louder this time, but still somehow distant, like it was happening through layers of time. She wasn't alone. And she had a choice. Walk away and pretend none of it ever happened. Or go back into that room and find out the truth. She reached for her flashlight. The hallway outside was silent. Too silent. Sara moved down the hall with slow, careful steps. The flashlight in her hand felt heavy, and the silence around her was thick enough to feel. Apartment 3B's door stood at the end, just like it always had, sealed, quiet, untouched since the police left. But something felt different now. Not just the knock. It was like the air around it had changed, heavier, more charged, like it was holding a breath waiting to be let out. She hesitated just outside the door. Her fingers hovered near the handle, unsure. The police had installed a new lock after the investigation, but it was basic. With the right tools she'd taken from the building's basement earlier, it wouldn't take much. Her heart pounded as she worked. One click, then another. The lock gave way. The door creaked open. The room inside was exactly as it had been left. Mattress on the floor, scratches on the walls. The window still cracked just enough to let in stale air. But now there was something else. A new piece of paper sitting in the middle of the room. Folded once, perfectly square. Sara picked it up with trembling hands. It was another journal page. One she hadn't seen before. But the handwriting, it was hers. The date on the top was from 2 days ago. That couldn't be possible. Sara stumbled back, confused, her mind racing. She hadn't written this. Had she? The words on the page described things only she would know, exact thoughts she'd had, moments she hadn't shared with anyone. Things she'd written in her private notebook. But this wasn't her notebook. And she had never set foot in this room since the police opened it. She turned toward the door, ready to leave, but something stopped her. A sound, not the knocking this time. Breathing. Shallow, uneven, coming from the far corner of the room. She aimed her flashlight, her hands shaking. There was someone there. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the light. A figure, crouched low, unmoving. Sara stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. But the figure didn't move toward her. It just stayed there, as if waiting. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, still staring at the shape in the dark. One new message. It was from Jamal. Get out of there. Now. I was wrong about the records. Grady never sold the building. He still owns it through a fake company. And he's still here. The message hit her like a wave of ice. Grady. The man linked to every missing tenant. The one who'd supposedly disappeared years ago. If he still owned the building, if he'd never left, then who was really living in apartment 3B? And had Sara just walked into his trap? She took one step back, but the door behind her slammed shut. The flashlight flickered. And then everything went dark. The flashlight died, leaving Sara in complete darkness. Her breath caught in her throat, heart thudding so loud it echoed in her ears. She reached blindly for the door, fingers slipping on the knob. It wouldn't turn. Locked. From the outside, panic surged through her chest. She wasn't just trapped. She'd been lured. A whisper cut through the dark. It wasn't a voice she recognized, but it came from the same corner where the figure had crouched. Now it was standing. She could feel its presence more than see it, tall, silent and watching. Then a match struck. Just one. It burned low, casting a small, flickering light that lit up half of the face in the shadows. Thomas Grady. Older now, slower. But those eyes, they hadn't changed. Cold. Empty. Calculating. He stepped forward, dragging something behind him. Chains. Sara backed against the wall, mind racing for anything, an exit, a weapon, something. But then Grady spoke, his voice calm, almost gentle. You've seen too much, he said. But you were meant to. He dropped the chains and pointed at the mattress. She lived here longer than any of them, he said softly. But she couldn't forget. She wrote everything down. I thought it was just noise in her head, until the others started writing too. Sara realized the notebook hadn't just been a record of suffering. It was a signal. A breadcrumb trail, left behind for anyone to find. I didn't write the page, she said, her voice shaking. You did. You copied my notes. Why? Grady smiled. Because you're the only one who ever listened. Just then, a crashing sound came from above. The ceiling groaned. Dust fell. And then light. Bright, blinding light from the hallway. Police. Jamal had called them. A voice yelled her name. The door burst open. Grady turned to run, but the officers were faster. He was wrestled to the ground, shouting something that didn't make sense. Something about keeping them quiet. Sara stumbled out, gasping. Safe. Or so she thought. 2 weeks later, she visited the station to return the notebook. The officer glanced at it, confused. "We didn't find any notebook in 3B, he said. There was no journal in the room at all. Sara froze. It was still in her bag. But when she opened it again that night, all the pages were blank. Except one. Just a single line, written in her own handwriting. "She's still in the walls." Sara couldn't stop thinking about that final message in the notebook. She's still in the walls. It stayed with her, echoing in her thoughts long after Grady had been taken into custody. The building was sealed off, the other tenants moved out, and the media called it a tragedy years in the making. Articles used words like unthinkable, hidden trauma, a case of long-term abuse. But no one really knew what had happened inside apartment 3B. Not fully. The truth lived in silence, behind layers of plaster and paint, inside the walls that no one ever thought to listen to. For weeks, Sara tried to go back to normal. She stayed with a friend, left the neighborhood, stopped looking into old records. She even tried to throw away the notebook, but each time she did, it would somehow find its way back. Not in a supernatural way. Just misplaced, reappearing in a drawer or under a jacket. Almost like she wasn't ready to let go of it. Or it wasn't ready to let go of her. Jamal left town shortly after the story broke. He said he needed a break, something quieter, something real. They kept in touch, but even their calls grew shorter over time. He never asked what happened with the notebook. Maybe he didn't want to know. Eventually, Sara decided to visit the building one last time before it was demolished. Standing outside, she looked up at the broken windows, the faded paint, the forgotten memories trapped inside. She walked around the back, near the basement entrance, and listened. Nothing. She pulled the notebook from her bag, now weathered and fragile, and gently placed it on the front step. No more whispers. No more pages. It was over. Or so she hoped. As she turned to leave, a breeze caught the edge of the cover and flipped it open. Just for a second, Sara thought she saw a name appear on the page. Not Lena's, not Emily's, but hers. And then it vanished. The building was torn down 2 weeks later. Nothing remains now. Just an empty lot, some scattered rumors, and a story that people still whisper about when they pass by. Voices from the locked room, they call it. A true story about what happens when silence is ignored for too long. And somewhere, maybe far from here, a notebook waits for someone new to open it.